Imagine this. It's 3 a.m. and you're alone in your apartment. The world outside is silent, but a faint hum cuts through the darkness. It's coming from an old radio you bought on a whim, a dusty relic from a forgotten shop. You didn't plug it in. It doesn't even have batteries. Yet it crackles to life, and a voice, your voice, whispers through the static. I should have run. It's too late now. Your heart stops. Those are words you haven't spoken. Not yet. But they feel like a warning from a future you can't escape. Welcome to the chilling tale of the radio that whispers your final words. In the heart of Portland, Oregon, nestled among hipster cafes and rain-soaked streets, lived Emily Carter, a 28-year-old graphic designer with a knack for finding beauty in the overlooked. Emily wasn't one for superstitions. She thrived on logic, her days filled with coffee-fueled deadlines and late-night true crime podcasts. But one rainy Saturday, while wandering through a cluttered antique store on Hawthorne Boulevard, she stumbled upon something that would unravel her world. An ancient radio, its mahogany case scarred, its dials tarnished, yet strangely magnetic. The shopkeeper, a wiry woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see too much, leaned in close. "This radio doesn't play music," she said. "It plays the last words you'll ever say." Emily laughed it off. A gimmick, she thought, perfect for her quirky apartment decor. She haggled the price down to $20 and hauled the heavy thing home, setting it on her kitchen counter. That night, as rain battered her windows, the radio hummed to life. No plug, no power, just static. And then her voice, trembling, desperate. "I should have run. It's too late now." Emily froze, her pulse racing. She checked the radio, tore it apart, found nothing but dust and wires. She tried to sleep, blaming her imagination, but the words echoed in her mind. Who was she running from? And why was it too late? The next night, it happened again. At exactly 3 a.m., the radio hissed, and her voice returned. "Please, don't let it find me." Emily's skepticism crumbled. She scoured the internet for answers, finding only vague Reddit threads about cursed objects and a single post mentioning a radio that knows your end. Panic set in. She tried smashing the radio with a hammer, but the next morning it sat untouched on her counter, as if mocking her. Emily's life, once predictable, became a maze of fear and questions. What did these words mean? Could she change them? And what was it? Determined to unravel the mystery, Emily began recording the radio's nightly messages. Each one was a fragment, a piece of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. I trusted the wrong person. The shadow moves too fast. Why didn't I see it coming? The words painted a picture of betrayal, danger, and an inevitable end. Emily's once vibrant apartment became a prison of dread. She stopped inviting friends over, avoided dark streets, and triple-checked her locks. But the radio's warnings grew darker, more urgent, pushing her toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. This is just the beginning of Emily's descent into a world where the future speaks through a haunted radio. Will she uncover its secrets before it's too late? Or will her final words become reality? Stick with us as we dive deeper into this chilling tale. Emily Carter's life in Portland was unraveling. The old radio, with its cracked mahogany case and eerie hum, had become an unwelcome guest in her small apartment. Every night at 3 a.m., it spoke in her voice, delivering cryptic fragments of a future she couldn't grasp. I trusted the wrong person, it whispered one night, followed by the shadow moves too fast the next. Emily, once a skeptic who laughed at ghost stories, was now a woman haunted by a machine that knew too much. She stopped sleeping, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, her mind racing to decode the warnings. Was this a prank? A hallucination? Or something far worse? Desperate for answers, Emily turned to her best friend, Marcus, a barista and amateur historian with a love for Portland's quirky underbelly. She invited him over, hesitating to reveal the radio's secret. "You're not gonna believe this," she said, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. She played the recordings she'd made, her voice trembling, saying things she'd never spoken. Marcus's easy grin faded. "This is creepy," he admitted, inspecting the radio. "Where'd you get this thing again?" Emily recounted her visit to the antique shop, the shopkeeper's cryptic warning, and the radio's refusal to break. Marcus, ever practical, suggested tracking down the shopkeeper for answers. The next day, they returned to Hawthorne Boulevard, but the antique store was gone. In its place stood a vacant storefront, its windows papered over, a for lease sign dangling crookedly. Emily's stomach churned. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. Marcus, undeterred, asked nearby shop owners about the store. An old florist across the street squinted at them. "That place? Been empty for years. Nobody's rented it since the 90s. Emily felt a chill. She'd been there just days ago, haggling over the radio. Was she losing her mind? Back at her apartment, the radio's messages grew more ominous. One night, it hissed, "He's closer than you think." Emily's heart pounded. Who was he? She started noticing things, a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow that seemed to linger too long outside her window. She installed a security camera, but it caught nothing, just grainy footage of her empty living room. Yet the feeling of being watched never left her. She confided in Marcus, who suggested she stay at his place for a while. But Emily refused. She wasn't running. Not yet. Instead, she dove deeper, determined to uncover the radio's origins. She scoured library archives and local history blogs, finding a 1980s newspaper clipping about a Portland inventor named Harold Vance. Vance, a reclusive genius, had built experimental radios that captured signals beyond our world. One prototype, described as a mahogany box with brass dials, vanished after his mysterious death in 1987. The article hinted at rumors. Vance's radio didn't just receive signals, it predicted them. Emily's hands shook as she read. This was her radio. But how had it ended up in her hands? And why was it speaking her voice? That night, the radio's message changed. You can't trust Marcus. Emily froze. Marcus, her oldest friend, who'd been by her side through heartbreak and deadlines? It couldn't be true. But doubt crept in. She remembered how he'd pushed her to keep the radio, how he'd been oddly calm about the vanishing shop. Was he hiding something? Torn between fear and loyalty, Emily decided to confront him, but not before taking precautions. She bought a journal to log every message, sketching a timeline of the warnings. If the radio was predicting her death, she'd outsmart it. As the rain pounded Portland's streets, Emily felt the walls closing in. The radio was no longer just a curiosity. It was a countdown. Something, or someone, was coming for her. And the line between friend and foe was blurring. The rain never seemed to stop in Portland, and neither did the radio's chilling messages. Emily Carter's once cozy apartment now felt like a stage for a nightmare she couldn't escape. Every night, the old mahogany radio crackled to life at 3 a.m., spitting out fragments of her voice from a future she dreaded. You can't trust Marcus, it had said last, planting a seed of doubt that grew with every passing hour. Marcus, her best friend since college, with his easy laugh and endless trivia about Portland's history. Could he really be involved in whatever this was? Emily's rational mind screamed no, but the radio's warnings were relentless, and her trust was fraying. She sat at her kitchen table, her journal open, pages filled with scribbled messages from the radio. He's closer than you think. The shadow moves too fast. You can't trust Marcus. Each phrase felt like a puzzle piece, but the picture it formed was too terrifying to face. She'd always prided herself on her logic, her ability to solve problems pixel by pixel in her graphic design work. But this This was beyond reason. The radio wasn't just predicting her death, it was rewriting her reality. Emily decided to test Marcus. She invited him over for pizza, keeping her tone light despite the knot in her stomach. When he arrived, his familiar grin and damp hoodie from the rain almost made her forget the radio's warning. Almost. "So?" she said casually, slicing the pizza. "You ever hear about that inventor, Harold Vance? The guy who made weird radios?" Marcus paused, his slice halfway to his mouth. "Vance? Yeah, I've read about him. Total nutcase. Thought he could talk to the future or something. Why?" His tone was curious, but Emily caught a flicker in his eyes. Something guarded. Or was she imagining it? She pressed further, mentioning the newspaper clipping about Vance's lost prototype. Marcus shrugged, saying, "Sounds like a cool story, but probably just urban legend." His nonchalance felt forced, and Emily's unease deepened. She changed the subject, but her mind raced. After Marcus left, she checked her security camera footage again, hoping for clues. Nothing. Just her empty apartment, the radio looming in the corner like a silent judge. But then, in one frame, she noticed something. A shadow near the window, too tall, too still to be natural. Her breath caught. Was this the shadow the radio warned about? Desperate for answers, Emily tracked down a local historian, Clara Hensley, who ran a blog about Portland's forgotten stories. Clara, a wiry woman in her 60s with a penchant for dramatic storytelling, met Emily at a dimly lit coffee shop. Over steaming lattes, Emily shared her story, leaving out the radio's supernatural element to avoid sounding unhinged. Clara's eyes lit up. Harold Vance? Oh, his work was wild. He believed radios could tap into time itself, like a frequency for fate. His last prototype was rumored to be cursed, stolen after he died in a fire. Some say it drove its owners mad. Emily's heart sank. A fire? Stolen? The pieces were aligning, and none of them were comforting. Clara leaned in, her voice low. If you've got that radio, be careful. Vance's journals mentioned a presence tied to it, something that watches, waits. He called it the listener. Emily's skin prickled. The shadow, the warnings, the feeling of being watched. It all fit. She left the coffee shop shaken, clutching a photocopy of Vance's journal page Clara had given her. It described the radio as a bridge to the end, a device that didn't just predict death, but attracted it. That night, the radio's message was a gut punch. The listener knows your name. Emily's hands trembled as she wrote it down. She wasn't just fighting a machine anymore. She was up against something alive, something that knew her. And Marcus? She didn't know if he was a friend or part of the nightmare, but she was done hiding. She'd face the listener, whatever it was, and rewrite her fate. Emily Carter's world was shrinking, suffocated by the relentless whispers of the old radio in her Portland apartment. The latest message, "The listener knows your name," had turned her fear into a living thing, a weight that pressed against her chest day and night. The radio, with its scarred mahogany case and tarnished dials, was no longer just an object. It was a doorway to something sinister, something Clara Hensley, the historian, had called the listener. Emily's journal, now a chaotic map of cryptic phrases, pointed to a truth she could barely comprehend. The radio wasn't just predicting her death, it was summoning it. Sleep was a distant memory. Emily's days blurred into a haze of coffee and paranoia. She stopped answering texts, ignored work deadlines, and kept her curtains drawn, convinced the shadow from her security footage was out there, watching. The listener, whatever it was, felt closer now. Its presence, a cold breath on the back of her neck. She needed answers. And Marcus, her best friend, was her only lead, despite the radio's warning. You can't trust Marcus. Doubt gnawed at her, but she couldn't cut him out. Not yet. Emily decided to dig deeper into Harold Vance's life. She spent hours at the Portland State University Library, poring over microfiche and obscure records. Vance wasn't just an inventor. He was obsessed with bending time. His journals, fragments of which Clara had shared, described experiments to capture the echoes of fate. One entry chilled Emily to the bone. The radio sees the end, but it calls the listener. It feeds on fear. Was the listener a spirit, a demon, or something Vance had created? Emily found a lead. Vance's old workshop, abandoned in an industrial part of North Portland, near the Willamette River. If answers existed, they'd be there. She called Marcus, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I found something about the radio's maker. Want to check out his old workshop with me? Marcus hesitated, then agreed, his tone casual, but clipped. Sure, Em. Sounds like an adventure. His words didn't match the unease in his voice, and Emily's stomach twisted. Was the radio right about him? She packed a flashlight, a pocket knife, and her journal, telling herself it was just precaution. The workshop was a crumbling brick building, its windows boarded, its walls tagged with graffiti. The air smelled of rust and river mud. Inside, the place was a time capsule of decay. Rusted tools, yellowed blueprints, and shelves of broken radios. Emily's flashlight beam caught a glint. Another radio, identical to hers, tucked in a corner. Her breath hitched. Before she could investigate, Marcus grabbed her arm. "Em, look at this." He held up a faded photograph. Vance, smiling, with a young woman who looked eerily like Emily. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "The listener chooses its voice." Emily's knees buckled. Was this why the radio spoke? In her voice? Was she connected to Vance somehow? Marcus's face was unreadable, his eyes darting to the shadows. "We should go," he said, too quickly. But Emily refused. She rifled through Vance's papers, finding a notebook filled with frantic scrawls. "The listener binds to one voice at a time. It hunts through the radio. Destroy it before it claims you." Her hands shook. Destroy it? She'd tried that. The radio always came back. As they left the workshop, Emily noticed Marcus slipping something into his pocket. A small, metallic object. She didn't confront him, not yet, but her trust was crumbling. That night, the radio's message was a scream in her voice. "He's already here!" Emily locked her bedroom door, her pocket knife under her pillow. The shadow outside her window was back, taller, sharper, moving with purpose. The listener wasn't just watching anymore. It was closing in. And Marcus, her only ally, was either part of the trap or her last hope. Emily Carter's apartment in Portland had become a battleground, where every creak of the floorboards and flicker of light felt like a move in a deadly game. The old radio, its mahogany case glowing faintly in the dark, was no longer just a haunted relic. It was a beacon, drawing something called the listener closer with every chilling message. The latest, screamed in Emily's own voice at 3 a.m., still echoed in her mind. "He's already here." Her heart pounded as she clutched the pocket knife under her pillow, eyes fixed on the locked bedroom door. The shadow outside her window, once a vague blur, now had a shape, tall, humanoid, but wrong, its edges blurring into the night. And then there was Marcus. The radio's warning, "You can't trust Marcus," gnawed at her, amplified by the sight of him pocketing something at Vance's workshop. Was her best friend part of this nightmare? Emily's days were consumed by fear and research. She barely ate, her graphic design projects abandoned as she pored over Harold Vance's cryptic notes. The inventor's words painted a terrifying picture. The radio was a trap, designed to channel the listener, a force that fed on fear and hunted its chosen voice. Emily's voice. The photograph she'd found, showing Vance with a woman who looked like her, haunted her. Was she a descendant? A reincarnation? Or just a random target? She needed to know. But confronting Marcus was her next step. If he was hiding something, she'd find out. She invited him to a diner on Burnside Street, choosing a public place for safety. Marcus arrived, his usual charm dimmed, his eyes darting nervously. "You okay, Em? You look like you haven't slept in days," he said, sipping his coffee. Emily forced a smile, her hand resting on the journal in her bag, filled with the radio's warnings. "I'm fine. Just tell me about that thing you took from the workshop." Marcus froze, his cup clattering against the saucer. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. But Emily pressed, her voice low but firm. "I saw you pocket something." "What was it, Marcus? And why does the radio say, 'I can't trust you'?" His face paled, and for a moment, Emily thought he'd bolt. Instead, he pulled out a small brass key, its surface etched with strange symbols. "I found this at the workshop," he admitted. It was in Vance's desk, with a note that said, "To silence the listener." "I didn't tell you, because I thought you'd freak out more." Emily's mind raced. Was he lying? The radio's warnings screamed in her head, but Marcus's eyes held a flicker of sincerity. Or was it guilt? She took the key, her fingers brushing the cold metal, and felt a jolt, like static. "We're going back to the workshop," she said. "Together." They returned to the abandoned building under a moonless sky, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete. Inside, Emily's flashlight swept over the cluttered remains of Vance's life. She found a locked box under a pile of blueprints, its surface matching the radio's wood. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a single page written in Vance's frantic scrawl. "The listener is eternal. It moves through fear, binds to the radio's voice. To stop it, you must face it where it began, where I died." A map sketched below pointed to an old warehouse by the Willamette River, marked with a date, the night of Vance's fatal fire. As Emily read, a low hum filled the room. The second radio, the one she'd seen before, flickered to life. Her voice, distorted and desperate, hissed, "You brought him here!" She spun to Marcus, whose face was a mask of shock. Or was it fear? Outside, the shadow moved, closer now, its form rippling like smoke. Emily's grip tightened on the key. The listener was here, and Marcus was either her ally or her doom. She had to choose. Fast. Emily Carter's heart pounded as she stood in the dusty workshop, the brass key cold in her hand, and the second radio's chilling message, "You brought him here," ringing in her ears. The air in the abandoned Portland building felt thick, oppressive, as if the listener itself was pressing in. Outside, the shadow she'd seen for weeks loomed larger, its form twisting like ink in water, just beyond the boarded windows. Marcus stood frozen, his eyes wide, clutching the flashlight. Was he part of this, as the radio warned? Or was he just as trapped as she was? Emily's trust hung by a thread, but she had no time to unravel it. The map in Harold Vance's locked box pointed to an old warehouse by the Willamette River, the place where Vance died in a fire decades ago. If she wanted to stop the listener, that's where she had to go. This is crazy," Marcus whispered, his voice shaky. "We should leave. Call someone. Anyone." But Emily's resolve hardened. "No, I'm done running. That warehouse is where this ends." She stuffed the map and Vance's note into her journal, her hands trembling, but her mind sharp. Marcus hesitated, then nodded, his jaw tight. "Fine. But we stick together." Emily didn't respond. The radio's warning about him echoed too loudly. The drive to the warehouse was silent. Portland's rain-slicked streets reflecting the city's neon glow. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of rusted steel and broken windows, its walls blackened from the long-ago fire. The air smelled of ash and decay, and Emily's skin prickled as they approached. The key in her pocket felt heavier, like it was pulling her forward. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of charred beams and scattered debris. Her flashlight caught glints of metal, more of Vance's radios, half melted, scattered like tombstones. "He was obsessed," Marcus muttered, kicking a piece of twisted wire. Emily didn't answer. She was scanning the shadows, waiting for the listener to show itself. They found a staircase leading to a basement, marked on Vance's map with a single word: Source. Emily's gut twisted, but she descended, Marcus close behind. The basement was colder, the air thick with the scent of burnt wood and something metallic, like blood. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it, another radio, identical to hers, but pristine, its wood polished, its dials gleaming. It hummed softly, and Emily's voice spilled out. "You can't stop it now." She stumbled back, her breath catching. Marcus grabbed her arm. What the hell is this place?" Before she could answer, the room darkened, the shadows coalescing into a figure, tall, featureless, its edges shimmering like heat waves. The listener. Emily's heart stopped as it moved toward her, silent, but Vic system, but deadly. She clutched the key, her mind racing. Vance's note said the listener could be stopped where it began, How? The shadow glided closer, and the radio's hum grew louder, her voice screaming, "It's too late!" Marcus yanked her back, shouting, "Run!" But Emily stood her ground, the key burning in her hand. She had to face it. The listener's form flickered, and for a moment, she saw a face. Her face, twisted with anguish. It was like looking into a mirror of her own fear. The key pulsed, and Vance's words flashed in her mind. Face it, where it began. This was the place. She lunged for the radio, slamming the key into a hidden slot on its side. A deafening screech filled the air, and the listener vanished. The radio fell silent. Emily collapsed, gasping. Marcus was at her side, his face pale. What was that?" he stammered. Emily didn't answer. She didn't know if she'd won or just delayed the inevitable. But the key was still in her hand, and she wasn't done fighting. Emily. Carter's knees buckled as she knelt in the damp, ash-strewn basement of the abandoned Portland warehouse, the brass key still clutched in her trembling hand. The pristine radio on the pedestal was silent now, its eerie hum replaced by an oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow the air. The listener, that shadowy, featureless entity with her own anguished face, had vanished when she jammed the key into the radio's hidden slot. But Emily's relief was fleeting. Her heart still raced, and the memory of her own voice screaming, "It's too late," echoed in her mind. Marcus stood beside her, his face pale, his flashlight shaking in his grip. What just happened?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Emily didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself. The basement felt different now, colder, as if the listener's absence had left a void that was somehow worse. Emily's journal, stuffed with Vance's notes and her own frantic scribbles, lay open on the floor. She grabbed it, her eyes scanning the page she'd found in the locked box. The listener binds to one voice. To stop it, face it where it began, but beware the cost. What cost? She'd silenced the radio, banished the shadow, but the weight in her chest told her this wasn't over. The key in her hand felt alive, pulsing faintly, and she shoved it into her pocket, unnerved by its warmth. Marcus paced, his usual calm replaced by agitation. "We need to get out of here, Em. This place is giving me the creeps." But Emily shook her head. "Not yet. There's more to this." She approached the pedestal, examining the radio. Its polished surface was flawless, unlike the scarred one in her apartment. She ran her fingers over the dials, and a faint spark stung her skin. The radio flickered, and her voice hissed, "You've only made it angry." Emily recoiled, her pulse spiking. Marcus grabbed her arm. "That's it. We're leaving." Outside, the Portland night was heavy with rain. The Willamette River, a black mirror, reflecting the city's lights. Emily's mind raced as they drove back to her apartment. The listener wasn't gone. It was angry. And Marcus? She still didn't know if she could trust him. The radio's warning, "You can't trust Marcus," felt like a splinter in her mind. He'd been her rock for years, but his secrecy about the key, his odd behavior at the workshop, kept her on edge. She glanced at him, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "Why didn't you tell me about the key right away?" she asked, her voice sharp. Marcus sighed, his eyes fixed on the road. "I didn't want to scare you more. You were already losing it, Em. I thought I could figure it out first." His words sounded reasonable, but doubt lingered. Back at her apartment, the original radio sat on the counter, its mahogany case gleaming as if it had never been smashed. Emily's stomach churned. She turned to Marcus. "Stay here tonight. On the couch. I need you close." He nodded, but his eyes darted to the radio, and Emily caught it. At 3 a.m., the radio crackled to life. "You woke it," her voice said, low and menacing. "Now it hunts." Emily shot upright, her heart pounding. She checked the windows. Nothing. But the air felt wrong, heavy, like eyes were boring into her. Marcus stirred on the couch, mumbling in his sleep. She grabbed her journal, flipping to Vance's notes. One line stood out. "The listener feeds on fear. Starve it, or it claims you." Starve it? How? Her fear was a living thing now, fed by every shadow, every whisper. Emily realized she had to confront her fear head-on. The warehouse was the key, but she needed more than Vance's cryptic warnings. She needed to know what the listener was, and why it chose her. As dawn broke, she made a plan. Return to Clara Hensley, the historian, and dig deeper into Vance's life. But first, she had to decide, was Marcus her ally, or was he leading her straight to the listener's jaws? Emily Carter's Portland apartment was no longer a home. It was a cage, where every shadow seemed to pulse with the listener's presence. The old mahogany radio sat on her counter, silent but menacing, its latest message: "You woke it. Now it hunts. Paciente system. Hunts." Still burning in her mind. The brass key, warm in her pocket, felt like a ticking bomb. And Marcus, asleep on her couch, was a question mark she couldn't answer. The radio's warning, "You can't trust Marcus," gnawed at her, but she needed help. And Clara Hensley, the historian, was her best shot at understanding the listener. As dawn painted the sky gray, Emily made a decision. She'd go to Clara alone, leaving Marcus behind. She couldn't risk another betrayal. Clara met Emily at a cramped bookstore in southeast Portland, its shelves stuffed with dusty tomes. The historian's sharp eyes softened when she saw Emily's haggard face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Clara said, pouring tea from a chipped pot. Emily hesitated, then spilled everything. The radio's messages, the listener's shadow, Vance's notes, and the warehouse incident. Clara listened, her face unreadable, then pulled a thick folder from her bag. Harold Vance was no ordinary inventor, she said, spreading out yellowed documents. He was obsessed with bridging time and fate. His radios were experiments in capturing what he called temporal echoes, voices from the future. But his final project, the one you have, went too far. Clara slid a sketch across the table. A radio identical to Emily's, surrounded by strange symbols. Vance believed he'd tapped into a realm beyond time, a place where entities, like the listener, live. It's not a ghost or a demon. It's a predator that feeds on fear and fate, drawn to the radio's signal. Emily's stomach churned. "Why me?" she whispered. Clara's eyes darkened. The listener chooses a voice that resonates with its own frequency. Something about you, your fear, your past, drew it in. And it won't stop until it claims you. Emily's hands shook as she read Vance's final journal entry. "The listener is my mistake. I opened the door, and it came through. Only courage can close it." Courage? Emily was terrified, but the idea of starving the listener's fear gave her a flicker of hope. Clara leaned in. "There's a ritual in Vance's notes, a way to trap the listener. It requires the key, the radio, and a moment of absolute fearlessness. But it's dangerous. Vance tried it and died in that fire." Emily nodded, gripping the key. Danger was better than waiting for her doom. Clara offered one last warning. "Be careful who you trust. The listener can manipulate perception, make allies seem like enemies." Emily's thoughts flashed to Marcus. Was he a pawn of the listener, or was the radio planting lies to isolate her? She thanked Clara and left, her mind a storm of doubt and determination. Back at each other system. At her apartment, Emily found Marcus waiting, bleary-eyed and tense. Where have you been?" he asked, rubbing his neck. She avoided his gaze, clutching her journal. "I went to see Clara. Got some new info on the radio." Marcus frowned, sensing her distance. "What's going on? You're acting weird." Emily ignored him, her mind racing. Clara's warning about the listener's manipulation echoed in her head. She needed to focus. That night, the radio crackled to life at 3 a.m. "You think you can outrun me?" her voice hissed, laced with venom. Emily froze, her heart pounding. The message was new, more direct than ever. She checked her locks, her windows, her security footage. Nothing. But the shadow was there, lurking just out of sight, its form more solid now. A tall, faceless figure, with her own terrified eyes staring back. She clutched the key, its symbols glowing faintly in the dark. Vance's ritual was her only hope, but it meant facing the listener head on. And Marcus? She couldn't shake the feeling that he was either her lifeline or her betrayer. Emily Carter's Portland apartment was a battlefield of shadows and fear. The old mahogany radio, its dark heart. The latest message, "You think you can outrun me?" had sliced through her like a blade, its venomous tone confirming the listener was no longer just watching. It was taunting her, growing stronger with every ounce of her fear. The brass key, its strange symbols faintly glowing, was her only weapon, and Clara Hensley's words about a ritual to trap the listener burned in her mind. But the radio's relentless warnings about Marcus, "You can't trust Marcus," had fractured her trust in her best friend. Was he the ally she needed, or the pawn Clara warned the listener could manipulate? Emily stood at a crossroads, her journal overflowing with Vance's cryptic notes and her own desperate theories. Time was running out. She sat at her kitchen table, the key in one hand, her journal open to Vance's ritual. To trap the listener, face it with the key in the place where it began. Speak its name without fear. Only then can the door be closed. The warehouse by the Willamette River, where Vance died, was the place. But what was the listener's name? And how could she face it without fear when her hands shook just thinking about it? Marcus stirred on the couch, his presence both comforting and unsettling. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Emily returned to Clara, meeting her at a quiet park near the river, the air thick with mist. Clara's face was grim as she handed Emily a tattered page from Vance's journal, one she'd held back. "This is the rest of the ritual," she said. Vance called the listener Erin, an old name tied to sorrow and loss. To trap it, you must stand before the radio, hold the key, and say its name 3 times without fear. But if you falter, it'll claim you. Emily's throat tightened. Erin. The name felt heavy, like a stone sinking in her chest. Clara gripped her arm. And Emily, the listener, will try to break you. It'll use your doubts, your fears, even the people you love. Back at her apartment, Emily prepared. She wrote the ritual steps in her journal, memorizing them. Key, radio, warehouse, Erin. She packed a bag, flashlight, journal, knife, and steeled herself. Marcus woke, sensing her tension. What's the plan?" he asked, his voice soft, but edged with worry. She hesitated, Clara's warning about manipulation ringing in her ears. "I'm going back to the warehouse," she said finally. "Alone?" Marcus's face fell. "Alone? That's insane. Let me come with you." His insistence felt genuine, but the radio's words, her words, echoed. "He's already here." She shook her head. "I need to do this myself." That night, Emily drove to the warehouse, the key burning in her pocket. The building loomed darker than before, its charred walls whispering of death. Inside, the basement was colder, the pristine radio on its pedestal glowing faintly. Emily's breath hitched as she set her flashlight down, gripping the key. The shadows stirred, and the listener appeared. Taller, more solid, its face a distorted mirror of her own. "Erin," she said, her voice trembling. The shadow hissed, lunging closer. "Erin," she repeated, louder, her fear clawing at her. The radio crackled, her voice screaming, "You'll fail." The listener's form pulsed, its edges sharpening. Emily's knees buckled, but she thought of Vance's words. Starve the fear. She closed her eyes, picturing her life, her art, her friends, her future. "Erin!" she shouted, her voice steady. The listener screamed, a sound like shattering glass, and the radio exploded in a burst of light. When Emily opened her eyes, the shadow was gone, the radio a pile of ash. She collapsed, the key cold in her hand. She'd done it. But as she stumbled out of the warehouse, a new fear gripped her. The radio in her apartment was still there. Was the listener truly gone, or had she only delayed her fate? Emily Carter stumbled out of the charred warehouse by the Willamette River, her legs weak and her heart pounding like a drum. The Portland night was thick with mist, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and ash. The brass key in her pocket was cold now, its strange symbols no longer glowing, and the pristine radio in the warehouse basement was nothing but a pile of smoldering ash. She'd faced the listener, Erin, and spoken its name 3 times, just as Harold Vance's ritual demanded. The shadow had screamed and vanished. The radio had shattered, and for a fleeting moment, Emily felt free. But as she drove back to her apartment, the weight of her victory was overshadowed by a nagging fear. The original radio, the one in her kitchen, was still there. Had she truly defeated the listener, or had she only pushed it back? Her apartment was eerily quiet when she returned. The mahogany radio sat on the counter, its scarred surface gleaming under the dim kitchen light. Emily stared at it, her journal clutched to her chest, Vance's words looping in her mind. Beware the cost. What had she paid to face Aaron? Her sanity? Her trust in Marcus? She hadn't spoken to him since leaving for the warehouse, dodging his calls out of fear the radio's warnings were true. But now, standing alone, she felt the void of his absence. Marcus had been her anchor through this nightmare. Had she been wrong to doubt him? She hesitated, then plugged in the radio, half expecting it to hum to life. Nothing. No static, no whispers, no trace of her voice. For the first time in weeks, 3 a.m. passed in silence. Emily exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. Maybe it was over. She sank onto her couch, exhaustion pulling at her, but sleep wouldn't come. The listener's face, her face, twisted in agony, flashed in her mind. What was Aaron? A fragment of her own fear, as Vance suggested? Or something older, something that had chosen her for reasons she'd never understand? The next morning, Emily called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with relief and frustration. Em, what the hell? You went to that warehouse alone? Are you okay? She apologized, her voice cracking as she told him about the ritual, the listener's scream, the destroyed radio. Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, I'm coming over. When he arrived, his eyes were red, his usual grin replaced by worry. You should have trusted me, he said, hurt lacing his words. Emily's chest tightened. The radio. It said I couldn't. Marcus shook his head. That thing was messing with you, Em. I'd never hurt you. To prove it, Marcus showed her texts he'd sent to Clara, asking for help finding more of Vance's journals while Emily was at the warehouse. He'd been trying to protect her, not betray her. Guilt washed over Emily, but so did relief. The listener had manipulated her, sowing doubt to isolate her. She hugged Marcus, tears stinging her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. He hugged her back, but his gaze lingered on the radio. What do we do with that thing? He asked. Emily decided to bury it. They drove to a forested park outside Portland, digging a hole under a towering cedar. As she placed the radio in the earth, a faint hum buzzed in her ears, not from the radio, but from within her. "You can't bury me," her voice whispered, so soft she wasn't sure it was real. She froze, but Marcus didn't react. Had she imagined it? They covered the hole, the dirt sealing the radio away, and drove back in silence. Days passed, then weeks. The whispers stopped, the shadows faded, and Emily's life began to rebuild. She returned to her design work, her laughter slowly returning. But sometimes, late at night, she'd wake with a start, feeling eyes on her. The listener was gone, or so she hoped, but its lesson lingered. Fear can twist reality, turning friends into foes and truths into lies. Life lesson. Fear is a powerful force, but it's also a choice. The listener thrived on Emily's doubt, feeding on her paranoia until she nearly lost herself. In life, fear can distort our perceptions, making us question those we love or hesitate when we should act. Studies, like those from the American Psychological Association in 2023, show fear can trigger cognitive biases, leading to irrational decisions. Emily's story teaches us to confront fear with clarity and trust, verifying our instincts before letting them control us. Whether it's a haunted radio or a personal crisis, facing fear head-on with those we trust beside us can change our fate.